The first snow fell early that year, quiet as a held breath. It dusted the high stone walls of Blood River Keep in pale white, settling into the carved grooves of ancient sigils and the snarling mouths of wolf gargoyles that guarded the battlements. Winter always arrived harshly in the northern territories, but that night it came with purpose, sharp and unyielding, as if the land itself had chosen a side. Inside the keep, torches burned low, their flames bending away from the draft that crept through the long corridors. Servants moved silently, heads bowed, eyes averted. No one spoke above a whisper. The pack could feel it. Something was ending. Isla Wilder stood alone at the far end of the great hall. She had been summoned without explanation, escorted by guards who refused to meet her gaze. Her thin wool cloak hung heavy on her shoulders, damp with melting snow. Beneath it, her simple dress clung to her legs, still marked by the long hours she had spent in the library tower copying treaties for the council. Ink stained her fingers. Her hair, once carefully braided, had come loose, dark strands slipping down her back like spilled secrets. She smelled of parchment and hearth smoke. Not queenly enough. The great hall loomed before her, all stone and shadow, banners of the Blood River pack hanging from the rafters like watching eyes. At the far end, upon the raised dais carved from black granite, stood Alpha King Dominic Sterling. He did not sit. He stood rigid, hands clasped behind his back, broad shoulders squared beneath a mantle of black fur. His presence pressed against the air, heavy and cold, the full weight of an Alpha King who had ruled since his first shift. The bond between them stirred faintly, a ghost of warmth that made her chest ache. 5 winters she had stood at his side. 5 years of learning his silences, his tempers, his expectations. 5 years of enduring whispered mockery from noble wolves who called her the human mate behind their hands, who smiled to her face and questioned her worth behind closed doors. She had endured all of it. For him, the council formed a semicircle behind Dominic, their expressions carefully neutral. Among them stood Arthur Sterling, the royal physician and Dominic's uncle, his hands folded neatly over his cane. His eyes slid over Isla with something like pity or satisfaction. Her wolf stirred uneasily beneath her skin. Something was wrong. "Come forward," Dominic said. His voice echoed through the hall, stripped of warmth, stripped of the private cadence he used only with her. It was the voice he used to pass judgment. Isla obeyed. Each step felt heavier than the last, her boots clicking softly against the stone floor. She stopped several paces below the dais, as protocol demanded. She lowered her head in respect, though every instinct screamed to look up, to search his face for the man who once pressed his forehead to hers in the dark and whispered that fate did not make mistakes. "Do you know why you are here?" Dominic asked. Her fingers curled into her cloak. "No, my king." A murmur rippled through the council. Dominic turned his head slightly, nodding once. Arthur Sterling stepped forward. He cleared his throat, producing a folded parchment from his sleeve. The scent of old herbs and ink drifted toward her, sharp and bitter. Isla's heart began to race. "After extensive examination," Arthur said, his tone solemn, practiced, "it is my duty to report findings regarding the Alpha Queen consort's condition." The word condition struck like a blade. Isla lifted her gaze despite herself, eyes locking onto Arthur's face. His expression did not change. "Her womb," he continued, "shows signs of arrested development, scar tissue, irreparable damage. She is incapable of carrying a child to term." The world tilted. For a moment the great hall vanished. All she could hear was the pounding of her own blood, the sharp inhale she couldn't seem to stop. Her wolf howled in denial, scraping against the walls of her mind. "That is impossible," Isla whispered. She took an unsteady step forward before she remembered herself. "I was never ill. I have never." Arthur raised a hand gently, the picture of regret. These conditions can be congenital, silent, undetectable without proper testing. She turned to Dominic. He was staring at her, his expression carved from stone. "My king," she said, voice trembling now despite her effort to steady it. "You know me, you know my strength, you know I would never." "A king needs heirs," Dominic said. The words fell into the hall like a death knell. His gaze hardened, glacial blue eyes stripped of every trace of the man who once smiled at her over morning firelight. "Blood River cannot afford weakness. The packs watch us. The council watches me." Isla felt the bond between them shudder. "You are my mate," she said softly, "chosen by the moon, by fate." "I chose the pack," Dominic replied. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. Arthur unfolded the parchment fully and held it up, as if presenting proof of guilt. The council members averted their eyes, some in discomfort, others in thinly veiled relief. Dominic stepped forward to the edge of the dais. "You are barren," he said. The word cut deeper than any blade. "You cannot fulfill your duty as queen. I will not allow Blood River to fade because of sentiment." Isla's breath hitched. "I reject you," Dominic said. The bond snapped. It was not a clean break, it tore. Pain exploded through her chest, raw and blinding, driving her to her knees before she could stop herself. She gasped, clutching at her heart as if she could physically hold the bond together. Her wolf screamed, a sound of loss so profound it echoed through her bones. The council shifted uneasily. Dominic did not move. "Guards," he said, "escort her from the keep." The word her rang hollow. 2 guards stepped forward, hesitation flickering briefly across their faces before duty overtook sympathy. They each took an arm, firm but not cruel. Isla looked up one last time. Not at the council. At Dominic. For one heartbeat, just one, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, pain, something human. Then it vanished. She was pulled to her feet. Her cloak slipped from her shoulders, falling forgotten onto the cold stone floor. No one moved to retrieve it. The torches hissed as a draft surged through the hall, the great doors groaning open. Winter rushed in. Snow and wind tore through the entrance, biting and merciless. Isla stumbled as she was pushed forward, the guards releasing her just beyond the threshold. The doors slammed shut behind her. The sound echoed across the courtyard like a verdict. She stood alone. Bare hands numb, breath coming in shallow gasps, she stared at the massive doors of Blood River Keep. Her scent, once woven into its stone and hearths, was already being erased by the cold. Somewhere above, a wolf howled. Not for her. Isla wrapped her arms around herself and began to walk. Each step away from the keep felt unreal, like she was leaving behind a life that had never truly been hers to keep. Snow soaked into her thin shoes. Her dress offered little protection against the wind that sliced through her like judgment. She did not cry. Not then. She would not give them that. But as she reached the outer gate and the watchtower lights faded behind her, a wave of nausea rolled through her, sharp and sudden. She bent forward, bracing herself against the iron bars, breathing hard until it passed. Her wolf whimpered. She did not know that life still clung to her. She did not know that fate had already carved its answer into her blood. All she knew was that she had been cast out, broken in the eyes of a pack that had never truly seen her strength. And winter had only just begun. The road away from Blood River Keep wound downward through pine and stone, a narrow ribbon carved by centuries of hooves and boots. Snow thickened as Isla descended, the wind rising with the elevation she lost, as if the mountain itself exhaled her away. Her breath came out in white plumes. Her fingers burned, then numbed. She had walked for what felt like hours before she realized she no longer felt her feet. Only then did the tears come. They slid down her cheeks silently, freezing almost as soon as they touched her skin. She did not sob. She did not wail. The sound of grief stayed locked inside her chest, too heavy to release. Her wolf curled inward, wounded, confused, pressing against her ribs as if seeking shelter. Rejected. The word echoed with every step. By dawn she reached the outer villages that served the keep. Smoke curled from chimneys. Bells rang for morning prayers. Life went on. And they saw her. At first it was the stares. Then the whispers. A fishmonger paused mid-cut, his knife hovering as she passed. A pair of washerwomen fell silent, eyes tracking her like carrion birds. Children pointed, tugging at their mother's skirts until sharp murmurs hushed them. Her scent betrayed her. Even stripped of title, even broken bonded, the mark of a rejected mate clung to her like ash. Wolves knew it instinctively. They felt the wrongness of it, the rupture in the order of things. By midday, the story had already grown teeth. She couldn't bear him heirs. Human weakness. A curse, they say. Isla kept her head down. She bartered her last silver ring for a night's lodging at a roadside inn that catered to traders and lesser packs. The innkeeper, a broad-shouldered wolf with tired eyes, recognized her immediately. His gaze flicked to her bare hands, to the absence of royal marks. "Room in the back," he said gruffly. "No charge." She thanked him quietly. That night, as she lay on a straw mattress beneath a threadbare blanket, the pain returned in waves. Her chest ached where the bond had been. Her body shook with cold and something deeper, something that felt like mourning a limb torn away. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, more from habit than thought. The nausea came again. Days passed. Isla moved from village to village, never staying long. Wherever she went, the humiliation followed. The Blood River pack was vast, its influence sprawling like roots through every territory. News traveled faster than snowmelt. At a market square, a noblewoman laughed openly as Isla passed. "At least the king rid himself of dead soil," she said loudly, ensuring all could hear. The men around her chuckled. Isla walked on. At a crossroads shrine, a priestess barred her entry. "The moon does not bless the broken," she said coolly. "Pray elsewhere." Isla knelt outside in the snow instead, bowing her head as the cold seeped into her bones. Her wolf did not answer. The worst came when she reached the river port. The docks bustled with traders, sailors, and mercenaries. Here, power was currency and humiliation was entertainment. She was halfway across the pier when a familiar voice rang out. "Isla." She froze. Slowly she turned. Bianca stood near the gangplank of a merchant vessel, draped in furs far too fine for travel. Her blonde hair gleamed in the winter sun, her lips curved in a smile that did not reach her eyes. The king's chosen. The woman who now wore what had once been Isla's place. "Well," Bianca said, approaching with deliberate grace, "I heard rumors, but I hardly believed them." She circled Isla, eyes sharp, assessing. "You look smaller," she added. "Winter doesn't suit you." Isla straightened. "Move," she said quietly. Bianca laughed. "Oh no, we should talk. After all, I owe you thanks." A few nearby wolves slowed, sensing the tension. A tension gathered like a storm. "If you hadn't failed," Bianca continued lightly, "I wouldn't be standing beside Dominic now. Funny how fate works, isn't it?" Isla felt heat rise in her chest, hot and dangerous. "I did not fail," she said. Bianca leaned in, lowering her voice just enough to make the cruelty intimate. "The physician says otherwise. A womb that cannot hold life is not a womb worth keeping." The words struck with surgical precision. Isla's vision blurred. Bianca stepped back, lifting her voice again. "Still," she said, addressing the gathering crowd, "you should be grateful. The king was merciful. Many would have done worse." Laughter rippled outward. Isla felt the weight of every gaze, the press of judgment and curiosity. Her hands trembled. Her wolf stirred, teeth bared, but she forced it down. Violence would only confirm their story. She bowed her head slightly. "You are done," she said. Bianca's smile sharpened. "For now." As Isla turned away, Bianca called after her, sweet as honey. "Be careful on the roads, Isla. Winter is unforgiving to women without protection." That night, Isla vomited behind the stables of a roadside shelter, her body racked by sickness she could no longer deny. She collapsed against the wall, gasping, clutching her stomach as fear crept in alongside the nausea. Something was wrong. She had not bled since before the rejection. Stress, she had told herself. Trauma. But her wolf had begun to hum. Faint, persistent. Life. The realization hit her like lightning. She pressed both hands over her abdomen, heart pounding. Her breath came fast and shallow as tears finally spilled freely, hot and unstoppable. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. Not now, not like this." Pregnancy outside a pack was dangerous. Pregnancy after rejection was a death sentence if discovered. Alpha blood was not something a king ignored. She wiped her face, forcing herself upright. If Dominic knew, he would come. Not with remorse. With chains. By morning, she had made her decision. Isla vanished. She cut her hair short, trading her cloak for a rough traveler's mantle. She masked her scent with herbs taught to her by an old healer years ago, dulling the sharp edges of her wolf. She moved west, beyond the reach of Blood River influence, into lands where packs mingled with humans and titles meant less than coin. The months that followed were the hardest of her life. Her body changed rapidly. The nausea worsened, then eased, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. Her abdomen began to swell sooner than expected. Her wolf grew restless, powerful, protective. And then she felt it. Not one heartbeat, but many. She wept when the healer told her, hands shaking as she clutched the edge of the cot. More than one. Miracles born of betrayal. Isla endured in silence. She worked where she could, using her sharp mind and disciplined training to earn coin as a scribe, a guard planner, a strategist for merchant caravans. She slept lightly, always listening, always ready to run. Every insult she remembered. Every laugh. Every moment she had been made small. And as winter gave way to spring, then summer, her resolve hardened into something unbreakable. They had cast her out as barren. They had humiliated her in public, stripped her of dignity and name. They would never see her beg. They would never see her break. And one day, when the time was right, the world would learn the truth they had tried to bury. The Western lands did not ask who she had been. They asked only what she could do. Isla learned that quickly. The territory beyond Blood River's reach was a patchwork of lesser packs, human cities, and old trade roads where authority shifted with the seasons. No single alpha ruled here. Power belonged to those who could protect caravans, predict ambushes, and keep bloodshed from spilling into coin loss. Isla became indispensable. She settled near the coastal city of Greyhaven, a place of salt wind and stone piers, where ships from distant kingdoms docked beneath banners faded by sun and rain. Here, wolves walked openly beside humans, and lineage mattered less than results. She rented a small room above a cooper's shop, its narrow window overlooking the harbor. The scent of tar, brine, and wood filled the air. It was nothing like Blood River. That was the point. Her belly rounded quickly beneath her loose dresses. Too quickly. The healer's brow had furrowed every time she examined her, murmuring about accelerated development, about alpha blood that did not follow ordinary laws. Isla did not ask too many questions. She was afraid of the answers. By the time autumn crept back into the air, She could feel them move. 4 distinct presences. Not flutters. Kicks. Strong enough to steal her breath, strong enough to wake her from sleep with a hand pressed to her abdomen and tears soaking her pillow. Her wolf had grown vigilant, circling endlessly, a silent guardian that never truly rested. She hid. Even here, alpha heirs were dangerous knowledge. She took contracts that kept her behind desks and maps. She built patrol routes. She redesigned port security. She advised guild leaders on how to deter rogue packs without provoking war. They listened. Because her plans worked. Coin came steadily, respect followed slowly. But rumors are living things. By winter's edge, whispers began to circle her again. The woman who never drank wine. The woman whose scent was strangely muted. The woman who walked with a warrior's posture, despite her gentle voice. A dockworker once stared too long at her belly and murmured, "Strong pups." She did not return to that tavern. The pressure built not only from outside, but within. The bond scar in her chest ached at odd moments, when the moon was full, when the sea storms rolled in, when she passed a wolf who smelled faintly of pine and ice and power. Dominic. She shoved the thought away every time it surfaced. He had made his choice. Now she made hers. The night her labor began, the city was drowned in rain. Thunder cracked so close it rattled the shutters. And waves slammed against the harbor wall like fists. Isla barely made it to the healer's back room before the pain dropped her to her knees. Hours blurred together. Heat, pressure, agony so sharp it stole her voice. Her wolf surged forward, lending strength, anchoring her to the present when her vision threatened to go dark. She bit down on leather, refusing to scream. She would not let the world hear her weakness. The healer swore softly as the first child came, then the second, then froze when she realized the truth. 4. By dawn, Isla lay exhausted and shaking, 4 tiny bundles pressed against her chest. Their cries were strong, indignant, demanding. She laughed weakly through tears, a sound that startled her as much as anyone. Miracles. Impossible and real. They grew fast. Too fast. By the time winter fully set in, they were already alert, eyes following movement with eerie focus. Their scents were faint but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. Alpha blood, pure and concentrated, braided together. Isla became ruthless in her precautions. She layered scent masks. She limited visitors. She hired discreet guards and paid them well. She moved houses twice in 1 year, always staying ahead of curiosity. She named them carefully. Strong names. Grounded names. Names that did not scream royalty. And she loved them with a fierceness that frightened even her. Motherhood stripped her down to her bones and rebuilt her from iron. Sleepless nights did not weaken her. They sharpened her. Every cry tuned her instincts. Every small hand curled around her finger became an oath she swore without words. No one would ever hurt them. Not the world. Not a king. Years passed like this, measured in growth spurts and quiet victories. She founded her own enterprise when the boys were old enough to sit quietly in her office with wooden swords and chalk boards. Silver Moon Security began as a modest consultancy and grew into something formidable. She trained herself relentlessly. Blade strategy, hand-to-hand combat. If she could not shift openly, she would master every other way to survive. The boys watched. They learned faster than she expected. Too fast. They stood between her and strangers without being told. They reacted to threats before she smelled them. When one of them cried, the others responded instantly, a seamless unit that unsettled even seasoned wolves. Once a drunken sailor grabbed Isla's wrist in the market. He did not touch her again. He was thrown backward by an invisible force, skidding across wet stone with a scream. The boys stared at their hands in shock. Isla bundled them home without a word and reinforced every ward she knew. After that, she began to understand. They were not merely alpha heirs. They were something older. The pressure grew heavier. Messages arrived from distant packs asking questions disguised as offers. Guild leaders spoke of alliances and bloodlines with too much interest. Once, a Blood River merchant passed through Greyhaven, and Isla did not sleep until his ship was gone. She knew this peace was temporary. She felt the pull of fate tightening, like a noose drawn slowly, patiently. The final sign came with the envelope. It arrived by private courier, sealed with a crest she knew by heart, the wolf rampant, the crown. Her hands went cold as she stared at it, the scent of cedar and authority bleeding through the wax. The past had found her. One of the boys looked up from his workbench, eyes sharp and too old for his face. "That smells like him," he said quietly. Isla closed her eyes. The pressure was no longer building. It had reached its breaking point. Isla did not open the envelope at first. It lay on her desk like a blade left deliberately within reach, its wax seal unbroken, the royal crest pressed deep as if to ensure she could feel it even without touching. The boys watched her from the far side of the room, quiet in a way that made her skin prickle. They knew. They always knew. The wind off the harbor rattled the window panes. Somewhere below, gulls cried over the water, their calls sharp and restless. Isla inhaled slowly, grounding herself in the familiar sense of ink, oiled wood, and the faint trace of her son's mingled auras. Then she broke the seal. The parchment slid free with a whisper. The words were elegant, measured and cruel in their restraint. An invitation. Not a summons, not an apology. An invitation to the 5th-year coronation anniversary of Alpha King Dominic Sterling, held at Blood River Keep. A celebration of prosperity, of unity, of legacy. Her eyes skimmed the final lines, jaw tightening. The king wished to extend an olive branch to old acquaintances, to show there were no lingering resentments regarding past shortcomings. Shortcomings. The word burned. Isla's hand trembled once sharply before she folded the parchment and set it down with deliberate care. The room felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing inward as memories surged unbidden. Snow on stone. The sound of the doors closing. The way the bond tore like flesh. "Mom," one of the boys said quietly. She looked up. All four stood now, lined instinctively in front of her desk. They were still young, still small enough that the table came up to their chests, but the air around them felt heavy, charged. Their eyes were too knowing. "He wants to see you," another said, not a question. "He wants to humiliate you," said a third, voice flat. Isla swallowed. "Yes." Silence stretched. "And you're thinking about going," the fourth finished. The truth settled between them. Isla rose from her chair and moved to the window, resting her palms against the cool glass. The harbor spread out below, gray and endless. For years she had built her life here piece by piece, brick by brick, far from Blood River's shadow. She had sworn never to return. "He thinks I'm still weak," she said finally. "Still ashamed, still small." Her voice did not break. "They always do," one of the boys murmured. Isla turned. "I did not survive everything we did just to prove him right," she continued. "But this is dangerous, if he knows the truth." "He will," another interrupted calmly, "eventually." The certainty in his tone made her chest tighten. "They already suspect," he went on. "Our scent, our growth, power like this doesn't stay hidden forever." Isla closed her eyes. Her wolf stirred, restless and fierce, no longer wounded but watchful. The years had changed her. Pain had carved channels in her and strength had filled them. Still fear lingered. Not for herself. For them. That night she dreamed of Blood River Keep. Of standing in the great hall again, only this time the torches bent toward her, not away. She dreamed of the dais cracking beneath her feet, of stone splitting to reveal roots and bone and truth. She woke with her heart pounding and her son standing around her bed, hands pressed to the mattress as if anchoring her to the world. The decision was made before dawn. If Dominic Sterling wanted to look upon what he had cast aside, she would not hide. She would not bow. She would arrive on her own terms. The journey east was tense and silent. They did not take the main roads. Isla hired her most trusted guards and masked the boy's scents carefully, though it felt increasingly futile. Every mile closer to Blood River tightened the invisible thread pulling at her chest. By the time the fortress came into view, carved into the mountainside like a crown of stone, her hands were steady. The keep had not changed. It loomed exactly as it always had, arrogant and unyielding, banners snapping in the high wind. Lights blazed from every window. Music drifted faintly across the courtyard, rich and triumphant. A celebration. She almost laughed. They entered through the outer gates amid a stream of nobles and envoys. Heads turned. Whispers sparked and spread like fire through dry grass. Some recognized her immediately. Others needed only a moment. The rejected mate. The barren queen. Isla felt their gazes slide over her gown, over her posture, over the 4 boys walking calmly at her side. She lifted her chin and walked on. Inside the great hall, the noise swelled. Laughter, music, the clink of goblets. And then, as if the room itself inhaled, silence rippled outward. Dominic stood from his throne. For one suspended moment, they stared at each other across the expanse of stone and bodies and years. He looked older. Not in face, but in the eyes. The glacial certainty had dulled, replaced by something restless and hollow. His gaze swept over her, sharp and disbelieving, then faltered as it dropped to the boys. She saw it. The recognition. The way his breath caught. She stepped forward before he could speak. "Happy anniversary," Isla said clearly, her voice carrying without effort. "I received your invitation." A murmur surged through the hall. Bianca rose beside him, her smile brittle. Her gaze snapped to the boys, narrowing. "You had no right to come here," she hissed. Isla turned her eyes on her, cool and unflinching. "You invited me," she replied. "Or has that courtesy been forgotten as well?" Dominic descended the dais slowly, as if drawn by a force he could neither name nor resist. His eyes never left the children. "Isla," he said hoarsely, "who are they?" The hall seemed to tilt. This was it. The breaking point. Isla placed her hands gently on the shoulders of the 2 nearest boys, grounding herself in their warmth, their presence. She looked Dominic directly in the eyes. "They are mine," she said. The truth hovered on her tongue, heavy and dangerous. And in that suspended moment, as power shifted and the air thickened with destiny, Isla felt something she had not felt since the night she was cast into the snow. Control. The great hall did not erupt. It held its breath. Isla felt it in the way the torches stilled, in the way even the musicians seemed frozen mid-note, bows hovering just above strings. The Blood River pack was listening with something deeper than ears. Dominic stared at the boys, as if the world had rearranged itself without warning. "They are yours," he repeated. Not a question. "Not yet." Isla inclined her head slightly. "They are my sons." The word son struck like a dropped chalice. Bianca's composure shattered. "This is absurd," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. "You drag children into a royal hall and expect us to believe." She stopped short as one of the boys lifted his gaze. The air shifted. Not violently, not loudly, but unmistakably. Several wolves in the front rows stiffened, hands going to their chests, breath hitching as instinct screamed recognition. Alpha blood, thick and undeniable, rolled outward in a subtle wave. Bianca took an involuntary step back. Dominic's face had gone pale. He could smell it now. Not just Isla's familiar winterberry scent, but something layered beneath it. Pine, ozone, blood river itself multiplied and refined. His wolf stirred violently, packing, snarling, desperate. "How old are they?" he asked quietly. Isla met his gaze without flinching. "Old enough to stand." That was all she gave him. She did not offer explanations. She did not beg him to understand. Years ago she might have. Years ago she would have poured herself open in hopes of mercy. Now she resisted in silence. Dominic straightened slowly, the king returning to his spine by instinct alone. Eyes were on him. The council watched with hungry anticipation, already calculating what this could mean. "Guards," Bianca said sharply, "remove her. This is a mockery." No one moved. Dominic lifted one hand. The guards froze. Bianca turned on him, disbelief etched across her face. "Dominic." "Enough," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried. He took one step closer to Isla, lowering his tone. "We will speak privately." Isla smiled faintly. "No," she said. The single syllable rippled through the hall. Dominic blinked. "This is not a request." "And I am not your subject," Isla replied evenly. "Not anymore." A murmur surged again, louder this time. The council exchanged looks. This was not the broken woman they remembered. Dominic's jaw tightened. "You stand in my hall." "And you stand on lies," she said just as calmly. The words landed with surgical precision. Dominic inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring. His eyes flicked briefly toward Arthur Sterling, who stood rigid at the edge of the council line, his hands clenched around his cane. Isla followed his gaze. "5 years ago," she said, raising her voice just enough to ensure the room heard her, "I was told I was barren, broken, a failure to the pack." She took another step forward, the boys moving with her instinctively, a quiet phalanx. "I was examined, judged, discarded." Her voice did not shake. "I left this keep in winter with nothing but the clothes on my back and a bond torn from my chest." A hush fell so deep it rang. "And yet," she continued, "I survived." She gestured subtly to the boys. "So did they." The implication sank in slowly, inexorably. Arthur shifted. Dominic's gaze snapped back to his uncle, sharp and suddenly suspicious. "Arthur," he said, "what exactly did your examinations show?" Arthur swallowed. "I, my king, this is neither the time nor place." "It is exactly the time," Isla said. She turned her eyes on the old physician, and for the first time that night, there was something dangerous in her expression. "Tell them," she said softly. Arthur opened his mouth. No sound came out. The silence stretched. One of the boys tilted his head slightly, studying Arthur with unsettling focus. His small brow furrowed, as if working through a puzzle. "You're afraid," he said simply. Arthur flinched. "I don't like liars," the boy added. The chandeliers trembled faintly. Bianca let out a sharp laugh, brittle and high. "This is ridiculous. Children playing at power. Dominic, end this." Dominic did not look at her. He was staring at the boys now with something like awe and dawning horror. The bond tugged at him painfully, not whole, not healed, but screaming for acknowledgement. "Isla," he said, voice rough, "if what you are implying is true—" "I am not implying," she interrupted. "I am enduring." She turned away from him then, finally breaking eye contact, and addressed the hall instead. "I did not come here for forgiveness. I did not come to reclaim a crown." Her gaze swept over the gathered nobles, the whispering wolves, the council that had watched her fall without protest. I came to stand. The boys straightened subtly at her sides. I came so my sons would see the truth with their own eyes, so they would know the world that rejected them before it ever knew their names. Dominic felt the words like blows. The council shifted uneasily. This was no longer a spectacle. It was a reckoning. "We are leaving," Isla said, turning back toward the doors. "You have had your celebration. Enjoy it." She took a step. Dominic moved without thinking, reaching out. "Wait." His hand hovered in the air, never quite touching her. Isla stopped but did not turn. "You do not get to stop me," she said quietly. "Not anymore." The boys glanced back at him. Not with fear, with judgment. Isla walked out of the great hall with her head high, her sons at her side, leaving behind a room full of power that suddenly felt very, very fragile. Behind her, Dominic Sterling stood frozen amid the trappings of his rule, surrounded by courtiers and banners and lies. And for the first time since he had taken the crown, he felt something crack beneath his feet. Not stone. Control. The celebration never recovered. Music resumed eventually, hesitant and strained, but the rhythm was wrong, the joy forced. Conversations fractured into low murmurs thick with speculation. Eyes followed Dominic wherever he moved, measuring, reassessing. A king had been challenged in his own hall, and he had not won. Dominic remained standing long after Isla disappeared through the doors. The echo of her footsteps lingered in his ears, each one striking deeper than the last. His wolf paced furiously beneath his skin, torn between instinct and guilt, rage and something far more dangerous. Regret. Bianca hissed his name, fingers digging into his sleeve. "You're letting her make a fool of you." He shook her off without looking. She stood there, Dominic said slowly, as if testing the memory aloud, unafraid after everything. Bianca scoffed. She always did have a talent for theatrics. Dominic turned on her then. The look in his eyes silenced her. "She was never theatrical," he said. "She was quiet, she endured." The council began to close in, sensing weakness like blood in the water. One elder cleared his throat. "My king, the implications of what we witnessed are mine to consider," Dominic snapped. But the seed had already been planted. Dominic left the hall before the night was over, retreating not to Bianca's chambers, but to his private solar overlooking the mountains. He poured a drink he did not touch and stared out into the dark. 4 boys. 4 pulses in the world that felt disturbingly familiar. He pressed a hand to his chest, to the scar where the bond had been severed. It throbbed now, no longer numb, no longer silent. He had felt them. All along. He had simply chosen not to listen. The following days were chaos, wrapped in velvet. Messengers arrived from allied pacts requesting clarification. Council members demanded closed sessions. Servants whispered openly in the corridors. The guards watched Bianca with new eyes, measuring her status, her security, her future. Arthur Sterling avoided Dominic entirely, which was a mistake. Dominic summoned him at dawn on the 3rd day. The physician arrived pale and sweating, his usual air of authority gone. He bowed deeply, too deeply. "You examined Isla thoroughly," Dominic said without preamble, "multiple times." Arthur nodded. "Of course, my king." "And you found her barren?" "Yes." Dominic stepped closer. "Swear it," he said softly, "on your oath on the moon." Arthur hesitated. Just for a breath. That was enough. Dominic's aura surged, filling the chamber with crushing pressure. Arthur dropped to one knee with a strangled gasp, his cane clattering to the floor. "Tell me the truth," Dominic growled. Arthur broke. "She was not barren," he sobbed. "Her womb was healthy, strong, exceptionally so." The room went very still. Dominic felt something inside him go cold. "Why?" he asked. Arthur squeezed his eyes shut. "I was paid." The word echoed. Dominic did not ask by whom. He already knew. When Arthur finished speaking, he was weeping openly, shoulders shaking. Dominic listened to every word, every confession of forged records and altered scans, every detail of how easily his trust had been bought. When it was over, Dominic straightened. "Guards," he said calmly. They entered at once. "Take him to the lower cells," Dominic ordered. "He will await trial for treason against the crown." Arthur screamed as he was dragged away. Dominic did not flinch. The confrontation with Bianca came next. She was waiting in her solar, packing like a caged animal, fury burning through her carefully crafted beauty. She turned as he entered, already mid-accusation. "How dare you imprison Arthur without consulting?" "Did you pay him?" Dominic interrupted. The question cut like ice. Bianca froze. Then she lifted her chin. "I did what was necessary." Dominic stared at her, truly stared, as if seeing her for the first time. "You paid him to lie," he said, "to tell me my mate was barren." "She was weak," Bianca snapped. "Human, unfit to rule. I saved you from a mistake." "You tried to have my children erased from existence," Dominic said quietly. "They were not your children," Bianca shouted. "They were a threat." The last illusion shattered. Dominic moved so fast Bianca barely had time to gasp before his hand closed around her throat, lifting her from the floor. His eyes burned, wolf close to the surface, control hanging by a thread. "You stole 5 years of my life," he snarled. "You stole my heirs." Bianca clawed at his wrist, choking. Dominic released her abruptly, letting her collapse in a heap. "Strip her of all titles," he said coldly to the guards who had rushed in. "Confine her. She will stand trial." As Bianca was dragged away screaming, Dominic turned back to the window. The keep felt different now. Smaller. The power he had once wielded unquestioned was fracturing under scrutiny. Council members began maneuvering openly. Allies hesitated. Rivals circled. And somewhere beyond the mountains, Isla Wilder was walking free with 4 sons who carried his blood and none of his allegiance. That night, Dominic stood alone in the great hall, long after the torches burned low. For the first time, he understood. A crown did not make him powerful. They did. And he had thrown them into the snow. The balance had shifted. Whether he rose or fell from it would no longer be his decision alone. The summons reached every corner of Blood River territory by nightfall. Not invitations. Orders. The council was convened under the old laws, the ones invoked only in times of fracture and succession. The kind whispered about in half-remembered histories and sung in low tones by firelight. Judgment would be passed. Dominic stood at the head of the council chamber as dawn broke, pale light bleeding through the high windows. He had not slept. His cloak lay discarded over a chair, his crown absent. For the first time since his coronation, he wore no symbols of rule. Only responsibility. The elders arrived one by one, faces grim, robes heavy with the weight of tradition. When Arthur Sterling was dragged in, shackled and trembling, a collective intake of breath rippled through the chamber. Bianca followed shortly after, her wrists bound, her expression a mixture of fury and terror. The guards forced her to her knees beside Arthur. Murmurs rose. Dominic lifted a hand. Silence fell. "We are here," he began, his voice steady despite the storm inside him, "because the foundation of this pack has been poisoned." He turned to Arthur. "You falsified medical records," Dominic said. "You lied under oath. You accepted payment to manipulate the succession of Blood River." Arthur wept openly. "I confess." A sharp hiss of outrage filled the room. Dominic turned to Bianca. You conspired to remove my fated mate under false pretenses, he continued. You attempted to erase my bloodline before it could draw breath. Bianca spat at the floor. I did it for the crown. The elders recoiled. That, Dominic said quietly, is treason. The verdict was swift. Arthur was stripped of rank and sentenced to death by the old laws. Bianca screamed as the words fell, thrashing against the guards, her carefully crafted composure collapsing entirely. You can't, she shrieked. Without me the alliances will crumble, the southern pacts. We'll answer to truth, Dominic cut in. As Bianca was dragged away, the chamber trembled with the force of her fury, but no one moved to help her. The council turned their attention back to Dominic. An elder stepped forward, staff tapping against stone. There remains the matter of succession. Dominic nodded. My sons, he said. The word still felt unreal. They are alive, they are of my blood, and they were wronged. A murmur surged. They are not here, another elder said carefully. They do not stand before the pack. Because they were driven away, Dominic replied, by my hand. The admission cost him more than any punishment could have. I will not command them to return, he continued. If they come, it will be by choice. The elders exchanged looks. That is not how kings rule, one said. Dominic met his gaze unflinching. Then perhaps that is why kings fall. The council recessed in uneasy silence. Outside the keep, the pack stirred. Word spread quickly of Bianca's arrest, of Arthur's confession, of Dominic's bareheaded stance before the elders. Wolves gathered in the courtyard, restless, uncertain, watching the fortress with sharp eyes. And then the gates opened. Isla walked in as the sun climbed over the mountains. She wore no crown, no sigil, no borrowed power. Her coat was dark and practical, her posture calm. The boys flanked her, alert, their presence rippling outward like a living tide. The courtyard went silent. Instinct took over. Wolves dropped to one knee without knowing why. Not all of them, but enough. Dominic stepped forward slowly, descending the keep steps until he stood before them, no barrier between them now but choice. Isla stopped several paces away. This is not an ambush, she said evenly. We came because you summoned the council. We came because truth was finally spoken. Dominic nodded. I owe you more than words. The boys watched him closely. I will not ask forgiveness, Dominic said. I have no right. I will not demand allegiance. He lowered himself then, onto one knee. Gasps rang out. A king kneeling before his rejected mate. I acknowledge my failure, Dominic said, voice carrying across the courtyard. Before the pack, before the moon, before my sons. The words rang like iron. Isla felt her chest tighten. This was the confrontation she had imagined in darker nights. Rage, screams, blood. Instead, there was this. Raw and public. One of the boys stepped forward, small but unyielding. You didn't protect her, he said plainly. Dominic bowed his head. No. You believed lies because they were convenient, another added. Yes. You broke something sacred, the third said. Dominic looked up then, eyes bright with unshed tears. I know. Silence stretched, heavy and expectant. Isla inhaled deeply. This was the moment. Not for vengeance. For balance. You cannot undo what you did, she said. You cannot reclaim what you discarded as if it were misplaced. Dominic nodded, I know. But she continued, you can face it. She stepped closer, the boys moving with her. You exposed the lie. You stripped power from those who abused it. You did not force us to return. Her gaze held his. That is not redemption, she said, but it is the beginning of accountability. Dominic bowed his head again. The pack watched, breath held. The power dynamics had reversed. The crown no longer dictated fate. Choice did. The courtyard remained still long after the moment passed. Snow began to fall again, light and tentative, settling on cloaks and stone alike. It softened the sharp edges of Blood River Keep, as if the land itself were watching, waiting to see what would come next. Dominic rose slowly from his knee. He did not reach for Isla. He did not look at the boys. He turned instead to the gathered pack. "By the old laws," he said, voice carrying without effort, "justice has been rendered. Arthur Sterling was executed at dawn, his treachery laid bare before the pack he had betrayed. Bianca was exiled beyond the northern borders, stripped of name and protection, her alliances severed in a single stroke. No songs would remember her." The pack watched these judgments without celebration. They watched because they were necessary. When it was done, Dominic returned to the courtyard where Isla and the boys waited. Not as a king seeking to reclaim, as a man seeking to stand correctly. "The crown remains," Dominic said, "but it will not rule you." Isla studied him for a long moment. She saw the man who had once cast her into the snow. She saw the man who had shattered sacred bonds. And she saw now someone altered by loss and truth, stripped raw by consequence. "I will not be your queen," she said quietly. The words did not shock him. He nodded. "I know. I will not live within these walls," she continued. "My life, my work, my strength were forged elsewhere." He inclined his head. "I will not cage what I broke." The boys exchanged glances. One stepped forward. "You can visit," he said carefully, "if you come as yourself, not as a king." Dominic's breath hitched. "I would be honored." They held his gaze, measuring. Not forgiving. Not rejecting. Choosing. Isla felt something settle inside her then. Not the mate bond. Something stronger. Peace. The council later formalized the future in ink and oath. The boys were acknowledged as Dominic's blood without being claimed as weapons of succession. Their names were recorded without titles, their paths left deliberately unwritten. They would choose who they became. Isla returned west with her sons weeks later, not in flight but in strength. Silver Moon security expanded, its influence stretching across territories not through fear but trust. Dominic remained king, but a changed one. He ruled with restraint. He listened. He did not hide behind certainty, and when the moon was high and the night quiet, he would sometimes stand on the battlements and feel the absence in his chest, not as punishment but as reminder. He had learned too late that power taken is fragile. Power earned endures. Years passed. The boys grew into forces the world could not ignore, each different, each formidable, bound not by crown but by loyalty to the woman who had endured everything and never bowed. Isla watched them with quiet pride. She did not need a throne. Her justice had not been loud. It had been lasting. And Blood River learned, slowly and irrevocably, that the woman they had humiliated in winter had not returned for revenge. She had returned to be seen. And in seeing her, the world had changed.